Hi everyone, and welcome to The Advocate with Glenn Allen. Today on the program, we're going to be talking about what is an alcoholic. And you know, later on in the program, we're going to take to the streets and we're going to find out with some of the people in this area, being Hamilton, the greater Hamilton area. We're going to find out what some of they think. And you'll be surprised by some of the mixed reaction we get from it, because of course, various people, I mean, people have different ideas as to what an alcoholic or an addict is. As usual on The Advocate, this is a program that's designed to assist individuals suffering with alcoholism, drug addiction, and of course mental health. But along the way, we want to talk about people's stories. We want to see how people have overcome these terrible things in their lives. We want to talk about those who are in the midst of their disease, and I know that they're out there watching. Because I've heard that through another show that I did for years, and I know that you're out there watching. So today on the program, joining me Rick Osborne and Marty Cosgrove, and the guys today, you're going to get to know Rick and Marty in greater detail. But I'm going to start with you, Marty, and that is, when you hear that question, and I know you've heard it a million times being an addictions counselor. When you hear what is an alcoholic, you know, a lot of people, especially in our business, would come out with the same answer, but it's not. Even within our business, or with our, you know, in the business of recovery and counseling, there are, you know, different answers, if you will. But when we took to the streets, it was really funny with the different answers that we got in the streeters. So when you hear that question, what is an alcoholic and slash addict, what's your first response?
Well, certainly in my work, I always want to know why somebody's asking that question. You'll always find out it's a family member, or it's they themselves are curious about something that might be happening in their life around substances. When you look at it from a technical standpoint, the term "what is an alcoholic," it still has a stigma attached to it in our culture and in our society. It still has a stigma attached to it, and there's a reason for that. It's because people often think alcoholics are the guys with the long coats and the bottles of wine and the brown bagging guys. But you saw the streeters. There is a lot better awareness now about what defines that in our work, and that's from sort of like a standardized social understanding and experience of it. In our work, an alcoholic is on a spectrum. It's on a continuum, right? Yep. And that's kind of like the last place for a person who has difficulty with alcohol. There are lots of problem drinkers that I would not define as an alcoholic. Alcoholism defines an alcoholic, and some of your definitions there were excellent. And you know, a person who puts it as a priority, misses time at work, loses families. These are the circumstances around it. But it's usually it's a person who drinks not just to cope, but as just a means for survival. And they evolve into this alcoholism realm where it's a physical, spiritual, and mental malady, where there's an obsession to drink when the person's not drinking. So you have an alcohol addict who drinks and then needs to drink more, but when they stop or they get refrained from it, and families often wonder, well, why would they ever start again? It's because when they're not drinking, the obsession remains. And that's the context of alcoholism. That's what defines an alcoholic.
Now, you said, we talked about the streeters that we're going to see in just a couple of minutes. And Harmony, if you can set those up, because we want the people to see exactly what we're talking about here. So we're gonna run them just after you answer this question for me, and then we're gonna introduce Rick. The questions that they answer. Actually, I'm gonna save that one because it's not fair to the viewer. So I'm going to ask you this. Stigma.
Yeah.
Okay, and I want you both to answer this one. And then we're going to throw to the streeters. When you hear the word stigma, I know what I think. And it really drives me nuts. You know, when we hear that word stigma, because the stigma with drugs and alcohol and sexual abuse, and, you know, is the stigma, first, is the stigma getting better? And some people might say, well, what do you mean by that question? Stigma 20, 40 years ago was horrendous, and even before that was even worse. Are we getting better in getting the word out there, or is stigma still a bad word?
Well, stigma is still a bad word. Stigma stops any sort of momentum towards healing as a culture, as a community. Stigma always stops it. I think what's happening in specific to your question is we have so much media attention given to and all these silly shows in the States. I don't want to mention any of them, Dr. Oz, that kind of garbage, right? That kind of stuff really kind of puts a spotlight on professional and famous people who struggle with addictions, and they make a mockery of it. And young people really think that that's kind of what it's all like, rehab and treatment and all that kind of stuff. It's not, that's not it. You know, and you know, I defy anybody to go into the places that Rick and you and myself have gone into and watch people pulling a fit out of their arm and blood squirting all over the room because they didn't actually jack right, and tell me, where's the romance in that? There's some stuff like, so that's what stigma has done. It's driven it to that. Well, let's make it entertaining. Because we don't understand it, let's make it entertaining. And these people who are interviewed, those were actually pretty good answers, and we'll get to that in a second. But the thing about, I think our culture is understanding it better. I just don't think it matters yet. They get it. But the piece around alcoholic and alcoholism, that goes into, like I said earlier, in this continuum, goes into a different realm. It's a disease, and it's defined in 12-step circles, for example, as a spiritual malady.
Right.
It's hard for the general population to understand it's not a behavior. Person takes a drink, it's a behavior, right? Well, why on God's green earth would anybody ever make that decision after being clean for a month, 2 months, 6 years, 17 years?
Once you have the taste of the good life.
And all of a sudden they take a drink again, what would create that sort of, it's an obsession of the mind.
Okay. Ozzy. Follow that one, but again, being a former biker, living that life, and now throw that stigma in there, because you're double whipped here. Because
there's many ways you can.
Well, but you're coming out of prison, and this time you really want it, man. But you're double whipped because you're a former biker, you're an ex-con, and you're trying to get help for your alcoholism, drug addiction.
Yeah, drug addiction. I took whatever, right? But heroin was my drug of choice. But obviously, I did a lot of time in prison and used whatever you could use. Yeah. You know, during that time. But it was it's a spectrum, and that's the thing is alcoholism addiction is a spectrum, and it's where you are within there. And I got out of jail in '93, and I was clean for over a year when I got out, and I was using within 3 days. You know, it's just that here you'd been clean for a year. What's drawing you back? So there is a broken piece in you that it takes time for that to heal. But it is, like I say, I can show you addiction in so many different ways. From a guy who, you know, I remember in prison, if you would lose conjugal visits if you got a dirty urine test if you were using drugs, and guys couldn't stay off marijuana. Enough to get a conjugal visit with their family, and somebody goes addicted to marijuana, in that case, yes. Yeah. So it could cause a big spectrum. Yeah.
Anyway, Harmony, of course, is the director of this program here at Cable 14, and she runs the show. She's the boss. She is the one taking care of all of us crazy nuts out here. So Harmony, if you would run the streeters, and you at home, try to answer this question yourself. Take a look at this.
I guess you could say it's different to everyone. Anything that somebody relies on heavily to get through their day-to-day actions. You know, they're addicted and they can't stop, and they're sacrificing things that are probably more important to other people.
That would be myself, among others that I know. But that's somebody who's habitually trying to get away from it.
Just someone who's dependent on alcohol, like they can't function without alcohol.
Just someone that lets it interfere with their day-to-day life. If they're going to work drunk, or they can't have a good time without getting drunk, or you know.
You know, guys, we had the opportunity to see that just before we came on camera. So my apologies to the viewers, because it was unfair to you. for us to be talking about it while you hadn't seen it. Well, we saw it just before we came on camera, so it was really fresh to us and a little bit unfair for us to be talking about it. But again, your first impressions again, now that the viewers have seen it, this time Oz. I mean,
well, like Marty said, they're actually fairly good answers, and that wouldn't be typical 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So we are winning the war of, or somebody's winning the war of education. People are looking at it a little bit different. I mean, obesity just got the designation of disease, and so we are starting to look at.
Why are you looking at me when you say that?
Okay, you're gonna have to cut that, right?
No.
But you know what? The definition, when it got the definition of disease, which I was around when that happened, that started changing. Even though I kind of argue that a bit on some in the spectrum, but it did get people looking at it differently and explaining it instead of, you know, Marty said behavior, but you know, no willpower was the thing. You know, you're a morally corrupt person. You can't get it together enough to keep, and that's not the case.
Okay, Harmony, I'm just going to go to Marty one more time, and then we'll go to our break. Okay, Marty, Rick touched on a point where, and I was going to ask you this before, and then I realized that the viewers hadn't seen the clip, and it's very true. You know, 20 years ago, those answers wouldn't have come out of those people's mouths. Yeah. Okay. What has changed so that the public are coming out with answers like that?
Well, I just touched on it earlier. I think the media, the television shows, animals, people like Charlie Sheen, you know, these. Geez,
that's the last person we really want to go to. But anyway.
But these are the guys that are representing it. These are the understanding that people get about what it's about and what it's like, and his winning and making fun of the 12 steps. Theo's documentary was brilliant. I thought it gave some really good insight into the madness.
Theo Fleury, you're talking about.
Theo Fleury. It gives some insight. So the media actually presents it in a much more, I think, efficient way. Now, there was a John Larroquette show, I don't know if you remember that, years ago, that sort of made a mockery of the 12-step program, which was unfortunate, and it was not really fair, you know, it wasn't really fair. And I don't mean to carve up these things but that is how we get represented. I will also say this, is that in the business, in the addictions field, with harm reduction strategies and client-centeredness and approaches, all taking, like these approaches have all taken a really strong hold in the treatment measures. That doesn't fit the disease model. That's about clients and client choice. That's about choice and behaviors. So this is where we have this sort of little, so what you heard in the streeters was people making choices, you know? And Buddy said there, the first guy said, and people that can't stop. Well, I'm suggesting that the issue about alcoholism isn't that you can't stop. The issue is that you can't stop starting. You see what I mean? Because everybody stops. It's impossible to continuously be saturated by alcohol all the time unless you're Nicolas Cage in Leaving Las Vegas and you die. You stop eventually, but the problem isn't stopping. It's not starting. That's an alcoholic. A problem drinker, they stop drinking, their life gets better. They go to a doctor says your liver's protruding over your thing, are you an alcoholic? That's a misdiagnosis. He's a problem drinker, he drinks too much. He stops drinking, starts running, riding his bike around, his face starts turning tan instead of yellow. Yep. His kids say, hello, Dad. The grass gets green. The neighbors say hi. His life gets better. When an alcoholic stops drinking, his life gets worse. Immediately. It'll be okay for a couple of days, but then it starts getting worse because slowly he gets turned upside down inside. So, okay, that's the piece. That's the piece the public doesn't get. That piece.
That's what they don't see on these shows.
Yeah, they defined it really well up to that piece.
Yep. Okay. Yep. And that's what this show's for, because we have to take it that step farther so that the rest of the public can understand, and we can take it further. Okay. And that's what the advocate. That's what this show is all about. We're going to take a quick timeout. And when we come back, we're going to get to know these two a little bit more. And we have some questions that have come in via Twitter, Facebook, and some of those wonderful social media things that, yeah, exactly, the look on our faces is like,
what are they?
Yeah, we're starting to get used to those things. Back with more of The Advocate with Glenn Allen right after this. And welcome back to The Advocate with Glenn Allen. Guys, Marty Cosgrove and Rick Osborne are with me tonight. Guys, one of the things that we haven't done yet on the show today is to let the viewers get to know you guys a little bit. And we have about 10 minutes left in the show, so not having the hour doesn't give us a lot of time to do that as we've done before. So, Rick, I'd like you to go first, and know that you have about 2.5 minutes to do it. But it's important that our viewers do get to know you. So,
well, got addicted to drugs young, 14, 15 years of age.
You're from Niagara?
Yeah, from the Niagara region. Actually, the Niagara region, heroin, Vietnam War, 1970. This is when I came out. I'm a little older than I look. And I got addicted to heroin, basically by somebody who likes to hurt young men. And they use drugs as a way. And so that's kind of a pedophilia and I got caught up in that. And then quickly,
you can say, it's okay, just because we're talking about alcoholism and addiction, you can say that you were a victim of childhood sexual abuse. I mean,
you know what? Actually, who's a victim of sexual abuse? Almost all men that hit the street. It really is a big under the tip of the iceberg kind of thing. So I got caught up, and the street did me. By 17, I was cutting and full on like that. Affective disorder, where I was masking my emotional pain with physical pain. By 19, a monster. By 21, in the penitentiary. I did 21 years I did 25 years. Yeah, 4 more. I did 25 years for robbery and weapons charges. Halfway in, I got out. 15 years in, I got out and started to try to turn my life around, right back to addiction again. And then when I went back in with God's help and grace, it stuck. And I got out in 03, and I've been at about 10 years now working with youth any way I can. I'm the survivor, and so I advocate for youth, and I have Ozzy's Garage.
Yeah, I was just going to say, tell us about Ozzy's Garage, because it's really cool, folks. It's really neat what Ozzy's doing with kids today and trying to keep them out of gangs.
Yeah, so I'll go into an area, or this way, I'm in Font Hill right now, and I work in different areas, North Bay and different places, but I'll go and build a custom bike or a custom car, old Camaro or old Harley, with youth. And, small C counseling, big M mentoring, and just identified youth that need some help, some advocacy.
Yes. Really quickly, you were up in, I go fishing where I thought it was up north. You were so far up north. I can't do that
joke. Bougamoo. And my son is still, 2 of my sons are up there. B-O-U-G-O-U-M-O-U.
Yeah, I know you can.
So 2 of my sons are up there right now. One of them is a Cree boy, and one of them is my actual son. Yeah. And they're up there right now. So.
Yeah, but tell us really quickly about how you took, and I know there is one boy that was the kids that were in your part of Ozzy's Garage couldn't be part of a gang up there, and you were slowly pulling all the kids into your Ozzy's Garage, and there weren't enough kids left up there for some of the gang. And the gang leader wanted to take you on, and he did.
Yeah, he did, and it's the way they work. I used to do the same thing. It was interesting. I had one young boy the gang was the 88th offshoot of Indian Posse out of Manitoba area. Which doesn't give it any credibility, it's just who it is. No. One boy who's 11, 12 years old, who was always with me when I was in the community. He was, one day I came a day early into the community, and there he is with the street gang. And so when I saw him, I chastised him and said, hey, what are you doing with the street gang and everything? And, out of the mouths of babes, right? He looked at me and he said, the gang boss, better to be behind him than in front of him.
Yeah.
And I just, I went, and the gang boss is now my son. And really? The gang's gone.
See, that's why I wanted you to tell that story, because that's awesome. So Ozzy's out there doing what he's doing. And Marty, your story is similar yet different.
I love hearing those stories. That's my story. I love hearing stories like that, not just of powerful healing, but of redemption and paying back. And I know Ozzy wouldn't have it any other way. The life that he's been given. This is not arduous. You look at the smiles on our faces and the light in our eyes. This is not, everybody talks about how hard this work is, about getting in there, mixing it up, and giving back. It's not that hard when you're coming at it from our perspective. My own personal life was in prison at a young age. Alcoholism, part of my life, my whole life. I loved to drink. I just loved to drink, and I couldn't stop once I started, but I could never stay stopped. I ended up in a whole heap full of trouble, and then after a profound spiritual experience of my own, I started to embark on learning about this stuff around addiction, and was accredited and involved in private practice for 15 years. I worked at a lot of the local agencies in this city. I love what I do. I love the community. I love the recovery community in Hamilton. There's a bunch of well-driven, powerful people that really care. For the last 8 years, I've been working with the Assertive Community Treatment Team of St. Joseph's. I'm the addiction specialist for our team. I deliver as much information and consultation to my colleagues when they're out there doing what they need to do, but also, you know, just on a day-to-day basis, being in the lives of individuals that suffer from this affliction. You know, my whole life, it revolves around it, you know, and it hits close to home. My own family members, you know, when I watch my own daughter, my middle daughter, struggle. I've talked about her in the past. If she happens to see the show, I love you. I'm thinking about you. May the demons sort of rest, and you get a little peace. But this is our culture. This is the culture we're in, and. You know, when we get an opportunity like this, we talk, we come together. We haven't seen each other for a while, but boy, it's so nice because it just feels like we're setting up a charge. We've got a flag. We're waving the flag that there's help there if you need it. And Glenn, thank you for the opportunity, and Cable 14 too. Thanks for the opportunity to let us have this podium. You know. Yeah,
it's really important, and it's funny that that you had mentioned in the beginning of your story, because the first question that we have coming through via Facebook is, do you think there's a correlation between alcohol, drugs, and sexual abuse? And they threw in there mental health. So there's a whole, throwing everything in there. So, Marty, you want to?
Well, you know what? I'm going to, from my perspective, is going to be different than everybody else's. Yeah. I did 25 years in the pen.
Yeah.
When I first went to the penitentiary in the 70s, there was drug use, but it really ramped up at the end of the 70s and into the 80s and everything. I watched the rapists go from 5 in a prison of 250 to half the prison in about a 10-year period of time. And you remember, this isn't me reading an article about why guys raped or anything. This is me talking to guys and seeing and witnessing and everything. And so drugs have changed everything, especially. Do you know, when I finally talked about being sexually abused, being raped by this pedophile, and hurt badly, when I finally talked about that and realized that the cutting was aligned to it, I started realizing, oh my God, like 70% of when I went to prison, we were all cutting.
Yeah.
And so we were all sexual abused.
Yeah. And now the stats out there that over 90% of long-term incarcerated males were sexually abused as children. And Oz, you still keep in touch with you know, people in the prisons and stuff like that. And not just, no, I don't mean with the inmates per se, but you know, a lot of stuff, what you're doing and helping and all that, you hear things. And you say, the guys say it's well over 90%.
It's a very, very high rate.
Yeah. Listen, we talk about you know, the alcohol and the drugs, and I just want to let you know that if you've been sexually abused, now in this area where we're doing the program, there's a group out there called Hope for Men, and if you want any help, it's a peer support group for adult male survivors of childhood sexual abuse. And our website is, I don't know if it's up on the screen or not, but I'll just let hopeformen.webs.com. Okay, and there's a group in Hamilton on Monday nights, St. Catharines on Tuesday nights. We're getting ready to work with Brant Sexual Assault, the Sexual Assault Center of Brant as well in the fall, and the Halton Recovery House in Halton. We're already doing some stuff with them, and of course Wayside Niagara, that is in St. Catharines, and that's where we are Tuesday nights. So if we can help you in any way, go to our website. My cell phone number and my email address is up there. Something else that came up through a question here, and it asked really quickly, because we're Bill, where are we? About a minute, really quickly, 30 seconds, Marty. Women in alcoholism there's a stat out there, and I know it. Do you want me to throw it out there and then talk about it real quick?
Well, yeah, I know the stat you're talking about. It's
Okay.
a Health Canada stat, and just this is for everybody to know. And you saw that there was one woman interviewed in the Streeters, and more women actually suffer and die from alcoholism in their living rooms than they ever do on the street. Yeah. So if we're talking about stigma, about how how alcoholism is perceived, the stigma doesn't fall upon the women because they're still behind. They're still behind closed doors, and for that awareness, and it's never ever be ashamed to come up front.
Yeah,
it doesn't take preference on genders.
Yeah, it doesn't. It really doesn't. And we didn't even get time to talk about young people. It's still the #1 drug that youth are seeking treatment for. I know prescription drugs is trying to chase it pretty good, but still, it's alcoholism. Yeah. Listen, it's been great to be with you tonight on The Advocate. For Marty Cosgrove, for Rick Osborne, I'm Glenn Allen. We'll see you next week.